I remember writing an editorial 20 years ago about how this industry needed a Got Milk campaign for exposure. You know, the other one that comes to mind is, remember pork, the other white meat?
Taste what's next.
Yeah. So in the comments, just remember that. Just like that wasn't effective 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Yeah, that's still not valid.
Well, Mr. Miller told me he never drinks milk. Look at him.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not good.
On this episode of ResiWeek, we talk how hard smart TVs are to use and CEDIA's new consumer campaign. All this and more on this episode of ResiWeek. This is ResiWeek, episode 491, Wealthy People Stuff. Welcome to this episode of ResiWeek. This is your weekly roundup of all the latest news and stories for the residential AV industry. I'm your host, Matt D. Scott for AVNation.tv, and this week I'm pleased to be joined by two of my good friends. First, we have Mr. Jason Knott. He's an evangelist over at D-Tools. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Then we got the one and only Mr. Patrick Norton. He's a content specialist over at CTI. How are you, sir?
I'm full of mirth and good cheer.
Excellent. All right, gentlemen, we are going to kick this off with a fun story that comes to us from CE Pro. Smart TVs are smarter than ever, but still not always easy to use. I'm going to argue the first part of that sentence might not be as accurate as we'd like to think it is. And the second part is also not as accurate in diverging directions. Maybe. All right. So go read through the article. It is a fantastic article talking about how not only are TVs becoming more ambient devices, as in they're on in the background more often than not, and how they're doing so much more than just, streaming or watching TV. There's photo galleries, there's screensavers, there's, seeing doorbells and lights and all kinds of other things, as well as gaming and everything else. They're the home hub, if you will. Jason, when you see an article like this, and when you look at kind of your own smart TV usage, is the expectation just too high that these quote unquote smart TVs will be easily used and, gosh, dare I say, functional?
Well, I would throw it back to you and Patrick and ask you the question that from your integration experience, that what do you think about how every 5 years the central hub of the home has changed? Mm-hmm. First it was, it's going to be just a keypad. Then it's going to be the iPad. Then it's going to be the remote control. Then it's going to be the iPhone. Then it's going to be voice control. Do you guys see, other than lighting, think about what is used in the home most often, and the TV is probably secondary to lighting, I'm going to guess, in terms of what's on. But do you see the TV as the control hub of the home now? That's what this article's kind of saying.
They may dream that. A lot of my background is not so much in integration on the consumer side, but in, helping people, design and build their home theater systems, and we occasionally stumbled into some integration-like stuff at the corners of that. But, I've been telling people I got into a fight with one of my podcast hosts at one point because we were talking about a new operating system upgrade. Doesn't matter from who. I'm like, come on, let's be honest. Do you really think any of the apps are going to function? Do you think they're going to maintain it in 2 years? Yeah, it's a $9,000 TV with an operating system that was just released. Shouldn't we just be honest and tell them to just buy an Apple TV or a Roku, because at least it'll be a consistent experience, and B, the apps will actually run until the company shuts down. And and I say that because there's been I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine where he was like, I spent all this money on this TV and I really like this idea, and I'm like, yeah, they have it's one of 9 television operating systems competing for an incredibly limited amount of development space. Give it up, buy a Apple TV or a Roku, or if you're more high end, buy a Kaleidoscape or whatever, but just don't expect a TV operating system to make you sing. Now, I will admit Samsung's got better, LG's got better, but still, TV companies are really great at making TVs and figuring out how to, make money off of reporting what you watch.
Mm-hmm.
And I have just never, ever fired up a TV and been like, this is the UX I have been waiting for my entire life.
So my favorite question I get from customers is always, what's your favorite TV? I'm like, you're going to hate me. And they go, no, what's your favorite TV? And I go, it's a commercial TV. You know why? Because it's got one input and I can lock it. It's the only one you get. That's it. Yeah, no, they're garbage.
It's a monitor.
Yeah, it's a monitor. That's what we love. We want a monitor because
I would like an
Patrick's
OLED monitor with really great contrast, but
yeah, that's it. That's all you need. It's all that matters.
You just can't buy one because they make more money off of the rent that they charge off of tracking what you use than they actually make off of the physical hardware itself.
So that is my question. Do they care when it comes to the UI? Do they care more about the ads or the experience? Like, I know the answer to this, but I want you to say it.
Well, as somebody who's worked really hard to avoid ads on every device in his house, even doing things like spending money to avoid them, I will say, I think they often care about, ads and information tracking and other sort of like side sources of revenue. Because again, the margins, the scariest thing I ever heard was years and years ago where Vizio decided they were going to do laptops and desktop computers. And I was like, why? And they're like, because the margins are fantastic. And I remember literally physically twitching and jerking back. And because I knew, because I'd done a lot of work with covering Dell and other manufacturers, that the margins in PCs were, outside of Apple, are non-existent. Are single digit on a good day, like high single digit on a great day in a high end product. And the idea that was the first time I understood that how much money the average television manufacturer was not making off of television, right? Yeah. So, I do believe a lot of them invest, or especially Samsung, right? Because Samsung's this massive Korean company and they make all this money off of phones and they have all this intelligence and they bring it in. So yeah, I think they think a lot about the interface and the design. I will graciously say I think every television manufacturer, outside of commercial vendors that do not have an operating system or any device that can be programmed, are constantly looking for opportunities to add additional revenue streams. Yeah. Not necessarily because they want to, but because they have to survive. Less so with LG and Samsung, maybe more so in a lot of other vendors.
Let me ask you guys this. This is interesting. In the article, it talked about the AI elements being added into the TVs. And, we know that, if you recall, a few years ago from CEDIA Expo, I think it was the keynoter, Greg Durkin, was talking about the recommendations algorithm in Netflix and how it's purposely driven to drive people to documentaries or to view programs on Netflix that Netflix can bought for less. So they don't, documentaries don't cost very much. So I'm trying to figure out what's the business model, the profit business model for the AI recommendations in these smart TVs, unless Samsung and Sony and LG have some sort of skin in the game for driving people to particular programming.
I read that paragraph, like AI is the next step in smarter viewing, and it's like we're not aware that AI is often tuned to give responses that the person offering the AI wants, right? Because AI is a tool, and when you get into that, it's like, okay, respondents who already use AI tools, 84% that they are interested in better show recommendations tailored to their preferences. 78% would like an AI that remembers their cue. So I think it's more like, I don't think television vendors have any interest in adding AI unless it suddenly turns out to be something that they could put on the box in a Costco or a Walmart that'll help them sell more televisions, or on their ever-lengthening title on Amazon.com. I think this is simply a reflection that we'd really, if I searched for X, I would like X, not Y or Z or P or D or Q, right? And that's a problem. I was laughing. like one of the oddities I've noted was, in its ongoing, I feel, group is a safe place. I'm using my feeling words. I feel, for example, one of the major music vendors is doing things like, I was getting a reggae mix, and a year ago, I'd say that Spotify would have given me all reggae artists, some obscure ones, some major ones. But this time I was like, this is a major song by a cover band, and, probably something they bought and probably they don't have the streams for. And I feel like there's a lot of cost cutting measures showing up, like our beloved host pointed out with Netflix, they drive you towards stuff that costs them the minimal amount per stream.
Now that we think about it, I'm sitting here talking about it, maybe Sony would have an AI algorithm that would direct people to watch films that were produced by Sony Pictures, and that's the way. And then, of course, they're renting that picture or whatever. I'm just thinking out loud, but there's got to be a reason or an end game financially for them to include that in there.
Don't forget that they also, the major manufacturers, they all have some level of free, quote unquote, manufacturer supported, like ad network supported TV that's over the network that lets you see, for whatever reason, Baywatch and like a bunch of other random 80s and 90s sitcoms are always available on those, I think Samsung's is Samsung Streaming Plus or whatever it is. That's also part of that algorithm world, right? Is that they're pumping you back into, you can watch this on our network, right? And then they're controlling those ads a whole lot more than they control when you're in the Amazon Prime app or the Paramount app or whatever. I think a lot of it is, again, they're just pulling data. It's all data mining, trying to see what they can determine to further flesh out.
I do find it interesting, Matt, that your first example there was Baywatch.
For whatever reason, it's the one that always stinking shows up. From that era, I would much rather watch Rocky. Shoot, what show was it? Not the movie Rocky. Rockford Files. That is my era show.
Because Rockford Files is about a decade earlier than
I know, but on all of those things, that's the one that I always go to. If I'm going older, it's Hogan's Heroes because I'm 85.
I mean, it's been funny to watch, right? Because one of the things that kind of leapt up in the last couple of years and already seems to be slowing to a crawl was like all the FAST stuff, the free advertising supported streaming television, Tubi being the one that really stood out.
They spent a lot of money to be non-relevant in 18 months?
There's so many private equity jokes I want to make right now, but I don't know who started Tubi. It may not have been private equity. But but it's interesting, right? Because everybody's got a theory about how they can make more money, off of streaming. And to get kind of back to the original, what's going on with the interface on, on smart TVs is like part of what's going to be interesting is think about it, right? You kind of started with Netflix, and you have sort of Netflix, Amazon Prime, HBO Max. Max is now back to HBO Max.
Back to HBO.
Watching these shifts over time, right? But and then you have all of these studios over time. There's Hulu, which is basically Disney. You've got Disney Plus. You've got Paramount. Another one I can't remember the name of, right? But you've watched this. It started out with Netflix scoring ridiculous digital rights for everything, and then it became a whole bunch of competitors, that were consolidators, this larger sense, right? The Netflix, the Amazon Primes, and then you get like every movie studio has their own streaming service, and I think this is the part of the side effect of that is when you get somebody that's basically buying a relatively off the shelf or just doesn't have the resources to do anything particularly sophisticated. On one hand, like a streaming app's not that complicated. There's a search box, you hit a play, this happens, that happens. Okay, we got to avoid this and this. That's patented by them. What's going on with these folks? But when you have a whole bunch of relatively small organizations trying to develop quality apps, it tends to be something where you're like, wow, this is an inconsistent experience across all of the different services I have going into my television.
Not only that, they have to not only develop that app, they have to develop iterations of it for all the different platforms and devices, which again becomes that if you've got a Samsung in your family room and a Sony downstairs, a Hisense in your bedroom, and a TLC by the pool or TCL by the pool, that may be a vastly different experience. And again, this is where I come all the way back to, I just want a commercial display with an Apple TV or a Roku, because it's just going to stinking work. All right, let's change topics for a second, because this will be just as much fun. This comes to us from Residential Tech Today. CEDIA is finally launching their first ever consumer-facing campaign. It's something that members have been asking about for years, an ability for CEDIA to try and become, I'll say, a little bit more relevant to the general consumer so they understand what that organization does and specifically what it means for the members of that organization when they're pitching to the public. I'm trying to not be super cynical about this, but I feel like we've been waiting for this since as long as I knew this industry existed. Patrick, they're doing this. I applaud them. I think it's great. I question why it took so long, but that's a whole other topic that we might get into later. But when you see this, is there a way to measure the ROI or the success of this campaign for CEDIA when, again, it's going to the general populace that in our reality doesn't actually interface with CEDIA as an organization at all? Can they track this?
It's ironic that a lot of people, when you look at commercial AV, which is, if you look at Avixa, it's going to be like a $400 billion a year industry in a few years, right? It's a massive industry. Half the planet doesn't know it exists. Half the planet who works in corporations or in IT doesn't really know that there's actually a whole group of experts out there that do things like make conference rooms work, right? Mm-hmm. And I mention that because, there's kind of an audience that maybe reads the Rob Report or magazines like that or websites that are like, because the Rob Report's still there. You find it on the newsstands and you find their airport newsstands, right? But
get it on your iPad.
Yeah.
Like I do.
But you know what I mean? But
because I'm like that.
There's I still prefer the filthy touch of paper on my fingertips, but I'm old.
My dad gets the paper version.
There you go. I do not get the Rob Report. I am no longer even aspiring eventually to be able to buy half of what's in the Rob Report. But I mentioned that, right? Because there's a certain, once you get to a certain level or a certain sort of level of financial success, you probably are aware that you can have somebody come out to your house and they can do a whole lot of cool stuff involving technology and programming, right? Mm-hmm. There's certainly a whole category of real estate agent and developer that pushes that these days, and some of the contractors have certainly embraced that. And when you get below that level or outside those areas where it's wealthy people who know about wealthy people stuff, it starts to get thinner, right? And there's a story you need to tell. And the story is like, we can do all these extraordinary things that, help make your house more useful by integrating technology. And, can you measure that? Absolutely. You can do surveys, you can do before and afters, you can ask people to watch material and find out whether or not they retain anything from it. You can, look at overall sales. You can target it at regions and look at to see if the campaign impacts sales in the regions. But it's such, CEDIA, I feel like, has this really difficult job of bringing together a whole lot of people with a whole lot of different business plans, working in a whole lot of different areas with a whole lot of different needs. And they do a lot of great stuff in terms of like training and technology. I think the marketing's really hard. Hopefully that answers remotely the question you were asking.
That's a good answer. Jason, let me ask you this. As someone who has beat this drum for longer than we want to mention, is the lift on this too big? Or are we talking like, let's baby steps, let's do it?
Yeah, I applaud CEDIA for doing this. And we were talking about it before we went live, that I remember writing an editorial 20 years ago about how this industry needed a Got Milk campaign for exposure the other one that comes to mind is, remember pork, the other white meat. That was
I
so
remember
now you
them
go
both.
back to, go back to your questions to Patrick of how is it measurable? Okay, I'm a milk producer, or I'm a dairy farmer, I'm a pork farmer, or a pig farmer. How is that ultimately measurable? Was by the lift on the entire industry. And
Sure.
I think the smart thing that CEDIA did now is, probably 20 years ago, this would have been really, really difficult to measure. Now, by part of what they've done here is create the creative and then put part of the burden on the integration community to actually push this out via their own digital advertising channels. And nowadays you can measure. You can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them buy. I get that, but you can measure the number of people who viewed it. You can measure the number of people who, if there's a call to action, that when the integrator puts something together, he has some sort of a call to action. Oh, you might want to download this white paper on how to build a great home theater, or what the elements of a great home theater are, or something like that.
Yeah.
So there are ways for integrators to try and, I think, get leads actually from it. Ultimately, will CEDIA be the one that's responsible for measuring each and the individually? It's going to be very difficult. But again, I applaud. They got to start somewhere, and it's
Right.
20 years ago they couldn't have done any level of measuring without. They're not going to spend $20 million on a Super Bowl ad for this.
Yeah. So in the comments, just remember that. just like that wasn't effective 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Yeah, that's still not valid.
I will give them credit, right, that they're aware of, they created the assets that go along. So people can do print ads, there's social media stuff, there's video clips. And with that, you could certainly do things like, okay, if you're particularly, regional or sort of a relatively small community, that makes it much more, affordable or approachable to try to tap into that energy with Facebook or Instagram or, any of a number of other areas. I mean, it's also really frustrating, right? Because one of the challenges, the conversation I heard a long time ago was somebody's like, this is amazing. We've got a 60% open rate on our emails. Somebody's like, great. What's the click through and conversion? And they're like,
0.
well, nobody's actually bought anything through these. It's like, that's fantastic. I love that you've got that 60% opening rate. But you see, we need them to actually click on something or call us or and that's the real big challenge, right? Awareness is great, but, closing on business is significantly more valuable in the long run.
To Patrick's point, I think an element that they could consider adding to this is especially if they're going to encourage integrators to push this out, then you're exactly right. They need to school them or educate them on how to have a good call to action, how to create a lead from this versus, hey, we put this on our website and it was viewed blank number of times. Oh, do you know who viewed it? No. Did you pixel them for social media?
Are you capturing contact information? Can you funnel leads to people? Can you make them? I mean, and it's tough, right? Because, the basic ad campaign, like magic, right? And I'll admit, when something's integrated properly, it is like magic and I adore it. But it's also, there's also another challenge is the cost on an average integration is something that outside of, so it's not quite Rockefeller territory where if you have to ask, you have to ask the price, you can't afford it. But, for a long time, a lot of the high-end integration stuff has been associated with being incredibly expensive and time-consuming. And that's also, Matt, this is one for you to address, but is like, I feel like there's a lot of sales there that people have to work once people show an interest, and it may be sort of a slippery slope thing where you get them involved in a smaller project and a bigger project, or how do you even approach people who have never dealt with integration on any level before?
It's such a challenge because the thing everyone wants to tiptoe around, whether it is the integration world or the homeowner, the customer world, nobody wants to talk about budgets and where budgets align with systems, right? And it's wonderful to show all the things we can do, like magic. It's very hard for the average consumer to understand how that relates because for most consumers who are typically not the ones reading the aforementioned Robb Report or Architectural Digest or anything like that, DuPont Registry, all those fun, lifestyle worlds. To them, a car is a car. It may have more features, but a car is a car. And in our world, there's a huge difference between a Honda Civic car, a Honda Odyssey car, a 4Runner that is rigged out for overlanding, and a high-performance supercar. Do they all drive? Yes, but is the feature set dramatically different and possibly skewed to specific lifestyles? For most consumers, they're still just cars. And that becomes really hard, because you can sit there and go, ooh, I want outdoor audio. And for a lot of customers, their version and their vision of what outdoor audio is a battery-powered Bluetooth speaker they take out on the patio. And that patio can be the backyard of a condo. It can be the backyard of an estate. It can be the backyard of a $2 million outdoor entertainment pool complex. That mindset may not change of that Bluetooth speaker. So they come to you and they go, "Ooh, I want to see magic." You go, "What do you want to do?" "Well, I want music everywhere." "Cool. That might be in the range of this." "Oh my gosh, I saw this awesome speaker at stinking, Costco that has LED lights in the cone and it's amazing." Not that I've ever lost a sale to one of those, but it's, I don't want to talk about it, man.
I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because I understand.
Again, I applaud what they're doing here and I love it. Where I kind of take pause is, and I'll use an example of a manufacturer in our world. They have a massive library of customizable digital assets that you can use to sell their product. We've used their, those assets a ton, and they're great. But at the end of the day, they help sell that product, not my company. My concern with this is making sure that, and every integrator is going to have to make this decision for themselves. And it's the same of any association. There comes a point where how much do you promote the association and leverage the association versus how much do you promote your company? Because yes, having better recognition of the association and what we as an industry do is great. But to your point on Avixa, we sell to churches all the time that need, somebody who's got a CTS because that's in the spec. I am not promoting Avixa to win the House of Worship project. I'm promoting us and leveraging Avixa when we need it to, again, win that bid and win that project. When we leverage CEDIA like that, it's the same deal. I want to market my company a whole lot more than I'm invested in marketing CEDIA as much as I love CEDIA. It's a tough battle.
It's a reasonable thing, right? Maybe you would be more invested in promoting CEDIA if they had started this campaign 20 years ago. Who knows? But at
possible.
This point, it's nice that they're making the effort. I'm curious to see what it does for them.
I will say that little girl had an awful lot of lights in her room.
Hey, don't mess around with layered lighting. It's very important.
This always brings me back to, one of my favorite conversations at CEDIA is I was talking to somebody, and this was one of those, how do we bring people into high-end audio? How do we bring people into, integration? And I looked at him and said, well, okay, so you've got a 25-year-old, they've got their first really nice apartment, or maybe they bought a condo, or they bought their first home. Like, what's your entry-level system? And they rattled something back at me. That was $13,000 without speakers. I thought that was a very affordable entry. And I just remember being like, you have no idea what a 25-year-old makes these days, what housing costs. And it's interesting to watch how this gets approached. And I'm curious to see how they measure it, because they're starting this early enough that you would expect them to be talking about some of the initial results and what they're seeing, by the CEDIA show. So I'm very, very curious to hear what they have to say.
Yeah, the vague thing will be, if the industry grows, will they say, "Oh, it was because of this campaign"? It's which
one hopes for more specifics.
very hard to quantify. Yeah, very hard to quantify.
And I do think that is the challenge that any association has, is it's just promoting awareness is tough. It's incredibly, incredibly tough. All right, gentlemen, let's leave it there. Thank you both so much for joining us. Patrick, if people want to connect with you, learn more about CTI or anything else you're doing, where can they do that?
You can find me. I'm Patrick Norton of both Blue Sky and on X.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Jason, if people want to connect with you, learn more about D-Tools, where can they find that?
They can go to our website, which is www.dtools.com. We actually have dtools.com without the hyphen
got it.
now. Yes.
Woohoo!
So you could do D-tools if you want to, but you can just write dtools.com and go. And I'm on all the social channels also.
Excellent. Thank you both again for joining us. Thank you for joining us as well. If you'd like to connect with me, you can find me at Matt D. Scott on most of the socials. But more importantly, please visit AVNation.tv, where you'll find this show as well as a wide variety of other shows with all the verticals that we cover. When you visit the website, please take a moment to check out our supporters. We are extremely thankful for their support and ask that you check them out as well. Thanks again for watching. That's all the time we have for this episode of ResiWeek,
the network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.